Yes. So, how do you think the cost of pilot training in Dubai
Okay.
or in Spain or
Okay. All
UK,
right.
that since you have been an instructor over
Sure.
there,
Sure.
some people ask about flight training. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pilot Podcast. Today we have a special guest, pilot Rizwan Taj, all the way from Dubai. And it's our honor to have him on board this studio. He has over 9 years of experience as a pilot ground instructor for teaching in Dubai as well as in Spain and in UK. And it's our honor to have you here.
The pleasure is all mine, Captain Neha.
Thank
Thank you so much for having me. It's a lovely setup, and I have to tell you, it's a beautiful place. I've heard so much about you guys for so many months.
Thank you.
And I was waiting for this day. And guys, I should also tell you, Captain Neha has more than 5,000 hours on a A320. She is one of the most famous personalities on Instagram. If you've been on Instagram checking out any aviation educational content, you probably know about Captain Neha Thakare already. And I'm here in Mumbai at the CNTAA studios, and we have something exciting happening. Thank you. Let's
Thank
move on.
you for a great introduction. Yes, we have many questions from students who do ask us regarding flight training in Dubai or in, places in Europe. So some people ask, okay, if in case I do my flight training in Dubai, can I get a job in Emirates?
I know this is one of the most common questions we get as well, right? So
Yes.
sometimes my students also ask me the same thing. I know some of them who did get the job directly from an academy, but I wouldn't say that's the norm. The norm is just like how you can't just go build the next tallest building in the world if today you just graduated as an architect. Similarly, you don't go for the one of the biggest airlines in the world and knock knock, give me a job, I just got my CPL yesterday. Normally doesn't work like that. There's a process. You would want to start with a little bit more smaller airline. You want to start maybe some of them would start directly into a bigger airline and then eventually go to the biggest in the world. Or some students would even go do scenic flights, tourism,
Correct.
air taxiing, cargo service. Instructors
Correct.
have a pretty good life as well.
Correct, correct.
Right? I can vouch for it. After
Yes.
9 years of working as an instructor, I think that's a good career pathway as well. But if you're planning on working for the biggest airline, you need to know that it will happen, but you need to pace yourself.
Correct,
Maybe a few
correct.
years, take it step by step.
Correct,
You know,
correct.
have patience,
Right.
persistence,
Absolutely.
and passion. And I always tell my students, if you want to be a successful airline pilot or any pilot in any flying industry,
Correct.
as long as you're passionate about this industry and you're very persistent and you keep trying, and finally you have to have some patience.
Correct.
And
Absolutely.
that's what I would say.
Absolutely. Talking about patience, yes, you know how much patience is required. I have taken like 7 to 8 years of ground instruction before I
sure.
started flying for an airline. So yes, and then continued the ground instruction
I'm sure,
definitely
I'm sure.
for over now 14 years. So for
14
you,
years,
it is
that's
9 years.
9 years, yeah. But
Yes.
I want to ask you something,
Yes.
right? So let's start. You mentioned, right, your journey. You've gone, I mean, it wasn't a piece of cake.
Yes,
our journey
absolutely.
wasn't a walk in the park.
Correct.
But could you tell us just summary, like how did you start? When did you start your training and some of the struggles you had to go through to reach
Yes.
where you are today?
Definitely, yes. In 2008, I got my Indian CPL. Afterwards, I applied for an airline. Back then, it was Jet Airways. Now it's no more. God knows if it comes up. But yes, that time I applied, and thereafter, global recession hit.
Sure.
And because of that,
The famous 2008,
all
2009,
yes, all the vacancies were cancelled, and then we were put on hold. That vacancy was not at all taken, after clearing all the rounds. And thereafter, in 2011, Kingfisher shut down.
Wow.
All those pilots were hired
to back.
in, because of which, again, there was a slack and there were no vacancies. So because of that, we had to wait for a really long time. And then 2014 and 15, things started becoming getting brighter. And then 2015, I got through an airline.
Amazing.
So that's how the journey was.
And you
So-
had to use passion, persistence, and
yes.
patience, all three of these
Still-
throughout your training,
Yes,
right?
definitely.
Do you think your training, when you did your pilot training back then, do you think your pilot training prepared you for these type of delays and these type of, do you think during your
No.
training somebody told you that this might happen during your
No,
training?
because when I started back in 2006, that time everyone who was getting CPL was getting a job in an airline,
I
because
remember that.
it was a golden period back then. Now things are much brighter compared to that.
Sure, definitely.
That time, the one who was getting their CPL was getting a job. Like majority of them, Kingfisher, then Go Air and Indigo had just started
Yes.
back then, and even Air India for that matter. Every airline came up with their openings back
It's
then.
true.
So
And I remember this was before 2008 when
yes,
I remember
6, 7.
in 2008 is when I started looking into the aviation industry. I completed my high school, 12th. I was based in Bangalore, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So I completed most of my,
Yeah.
most of my studies in my
Correct,
high school.
correct.
And I just completed my 12th. I was hoping to get into aeronautical engineering.
Okay.
And my journey was, I would love to share my journey, which was very weird because I had forgotten about pilot training. When I was a little kid, sure, everyone, you're a little kid, you're always saying, oh, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a pilot, I want to be a firefighter. It's one of those. But when I finished my 12th, I wanted to do aeronautical engineering. I even went to one of the academies in Bangalore who offered aircraft maintenance, I think, just to check
Right.
them out.
HL.
And it was somewhere, actually, this was close to the Jakur area, and there was
Right,
some
right.
aircraft maintenance
Right.
academy.
Correct.
And I was getting a tour of the facility, and in the
Right.
middle of the tour of the facility, the guy who was giving me the tour tells me, why don't you become a pilot? And I looked at him saying, do you have pilot training here? And he said, no. I'm like, that's so weird. Why are you offering me or why are you advising me to become a pilot
Very
while I
good.
am checking out your academy to become an aircraft maintenance? But something triggered. That was just a tiny little 5-second conversation. But I'm driving back home with my father. And I was like, I want to become a pilot. And then I reach home and I talk to my mom. I'm like, I want to be a pilot. And a month later, I'm doing my training in Florida.
Okay.
It just happened, right?
That's great.
But yeah, back to my point that we were not told the reality might be a little bit different. So yes, we went through a bit of struggle. 2009 is when I started training, 2009 and 10. And then obviously, as you mentioned, the aviation
Correct.
world wasn't doing that great.
Correct.
I even had to come back to Abu Dhabi. That's where most of my family lived. And I worked in a tire shop in Abu Dhabi with a pilot license in my pocket.
Oh,
So
okay.
for a year and a half, 2 years, I did struggle. I did my pilot training on an educational loan as well. So I had responsibilities, I had to pay back. So I had to
Right.
jump into any job I could
Right.
get. And my brother's friend was kind enough to offer me a job in the tire shop. And I said, let's do it.
Okay.
So the reason I tell this story to all my students is that, yes, I wish you get into an airline immediately. I pray for you. But you also need to be a little bit, careful about what you plan for.
Correct.
So I know a lot of students ask me, we're getting an educational loan. Is there a job guarantee? Yes, there's lots of pilot shortage out there right now. But I still expect all students
Correct.
take a well-calculated,
Absolutely.
don't
Absolutely.
do anything radical,
Absolutely.
I think you need to calculate everything. I'm not discouraging you from taking up this career. I know a lot of students who have done it. I think I was a good example. I struggled through that 1.5, 2 year. But and then, you start working
Yes.
and then you get the first job and after that
And
everything
then
becomes easy,
things
right?
bec-
It's
yes,
always that
absolutely.
first
That
little,
first
and that's why I always end my seminars by saying, as long as you're passionate, you're persistent, don't give
Correct.
up. You'll have a few
Correct.
difficulties.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to go
Correct.
and start something else.
Correct,
No,
correct.
stick to it.
Absolutely.
And that's what I always tell my students.
Absolutely. So it's worth it
It's definitely
to
worth it.
stay here as long as you're passionate. Otherwise, if someone is not really passionate and not really liking to become a pilot, then he or she may not be able to
Exactly.
continue. Because it requires a lot of dedication, focus,
Sure.
and precision at every step of your pilot
Sure.
training.
See, as an instructor, so I deal with students who are 16 to 25, aspiring pilots.
Correct,
And I get a lot of questions. If you don't mind, I would like to ask you some of the questions I normally get from my students about
Yes.
airline life. Now, a lot of students look at the airlines and they say, sometimes you're flying in the morning, sometimes you're flying in the evenings.
Yes.
And how do you balance family life with work life?
Yes, absolutely. It gets sometimes challenging in the sense that if you are doing and looking after your domestic work as well, Because if in case you have someone to look at home for to do domestic work like cooking food or just washing dishes and all, which is a requirement in abroad, whereas here in India a domestic help is available very
Plenty
easily.
resources available, yeah.
And at a comparatively much cheaper cost. So because of that, it is very easy to keep someone for as a cook or to do another domestic help. So in that case, as long as those things are taken care of, it is fine. You can balance your life,
see.
because then once you might have to go at night, full night, or you might have to wake up early in the morning.
Sure.
In that case, it may not be possible to look after all of it. But whenever you are home and your spouse or your family who are there at home, then you can give time whenever in between your flights.
I think more than managing your responsibilities as a homemaker, like I see you as a successful captain, you're a family person as well. So I think balancing the home resources, yes, it could be easily available with help. But how about missing your kids' birthdays? And that's what I get. A lot of people tell you, oh, I've heard pilots are never there for their kids' birthdays, for their PTA meetings in high schools, the parent-teachers meetings. What would you say about that?
So the thing is, I don't have kids yet.
Sure,
so
but in general,
I cannot answer to that question so precisely. But what I know from other pilots, so in our companies, there are, depending on company policy, so you can request for a specific days off in a year in advance when your family members have birthdays.
As long as you remember the birth dates, right?
Oh my God.
I think that's a lot of complaints as well. I've received a lot of complaints from my friends and their friends' wives. I've had a lot of my friends who work for airlines and the wives coming in and telling me, your friend does not even remember our anniversary. So I think that's more of a isolated incident.
So you need to plan it well in advance about those particular off days.
Okay.
And then about monthly meetings and about the student and parent and teacher meetings. For that, there is no specific leave for that. As long as you have certain leave patterns, if it falls in your leaves of that particular meeting, then it is okay. Otherwise, you may not be able to attend every time.
But I think
both parents,
you have to sacrifice something sometimes.
Correct.
Yes, this is a very glamorous industry. A lot of people only look at the fancy stuff. But I think I want to talk about some real issues as well. Is there anything you would say to the crowd out there which they should know about before they get into this industry? Because they want to make a well-informed decision, right?
Absolutely. So the thing is, it depends on actually what aircraft you fly. So if in case you're on narrow-body airplanes, of course, it again depends on how is the requirement of number of hours in that particular airline at that particular time, depending on number of aircrafts, number of flights, and number of pilots in that company. It is a very, very complex calculation, actually. So if in case in between the two flights, you have minimum rest, which is required as per a regulator, we are just doing that. Even if people think that they are staying in 5-star hotels, but we are just sleeping. Honestly. We are just sleeping, having food, and then coming back for another flight.
Sure.
It is, you may not even get time to look at all the places around that hotel. Okay. So that's how it is. And as per the regulator, if in case you are flying on a minimum rest, you should definitely allot that time to rest and not do anything else.
I fully agree with you.
If in case that time, if you are out with your friends chit-chatting, you're compromising on your rest period for the next flight.
Safety as well.
And then safety.
Exactly.
Yes.
I think that's exactly what I felt. Even though I'm not an airline pilot, right? So I don't fly as an airline pilot. I work as an instructor, as you mentioned. But when I'm running around in between different locations of our academy and sometimes there's meetings. So just the other day, I had breakfast in Hyderabad and literally I had lunch in Chennai during a meeting and I was in Mumbai for dinner. So I was just like, wait, I remember talking about this when I was 17 and 18 and I would dream about this. But then guess what? I used to dream about this. But when it happens, it's not necessarily always fun. It's definitely hectic.
Yes, it is.
And I'm not discouraging people from it. It is amazing, it's aspirational to do it. But don't always assume that it's going to be glamorous. Yes, it's going to be work. At the end of the day, you cannot compromise on safety.
Yes.
You have to make sure you don't go around checking out the city. Just go get your sleep
Huh.
so that you're safe tomorrow, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So any job for that matter, if you consider like as a adult, if any job you want to consider where you get paid good a handsome amount, in that case also the employees do have to work very hard.
Sure.
So even if it is a 9 to 6 job, or you might have to work for overtime and then traveling time, so definitely that is also not very easy either. So where you want to focus, whether you want to focus on a little different timings every
Yeah.
day and then enjoy this life, pilot life, or you want to be in that.
Yeah, I mean, like doctors and lawyers, they don't have a very easy life. Doctors do
Yes.
work very hard as well. So yes,
Yes.
if you want to become something in life, I think if you want to be successful, if you want to reach those heights, you have to work hard. So
Absolutely.
that's
Yes.
that's very normal. But
Yes.
at least as long as you're enjoying
Absolutely.
what you're working, then you don't work a single day, as they say, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Definitely. Yes. So, how do you think the cost of pilot training in Dubai or in Spain or
Okay,
UK?
all right.
That since you have been an instructor
Sure,
over there,
sure.
some people ask about flight training
Yep.
over there. So,
Definitely.
would like to highlight that as well.
Sure. See, when it comes to cost of the training, obviously you get what you pay for. I also want to start off by saying that yes, the cost of the training can be quite different in different parts of the world.
Yes.
And you have to choose, based on a number of things. So Dubai, the Middle East is, yes, definitely a little bit more expensive compared to pilot training, I would say, in the North America or in Australia, New Zealand.
How much?
Okay, a ballpark figure I would tell you, right? So I work for a global company with locations all over the world, and I would say Europe would be the most expensive. The way I look at it is, majority of the European flight schools would be the 70,000 euro plus, 70 to 80,000 euro plus margin, depending.
Okay.
So Europe would be considered as the most expensive. But then again, because we're talking to Indian students, I think as an Indian myself, the European YASA requirement is much less number of hours. So as an Indian, you would eventually want to come back to India, do your DGCA. So I think Europe would be more expensive, less number of flying hours, not very DGCA India friendly. So I would normally not advise students to go to Europe unless you have the work permit to stay back and work in Europe.
Correct.
That's the only
Correct.
reason why I think Indian students end up doing their pilot training in Europe. So that's number one, 70 to 80,000 euro plus margin. That's for Europe. The next option I would say is, North America. I think, as you know, majority of Indians
correct.
have that affinity towards pilot training in the
Correct,
US. I did my pilot training in Florida myself. I think the North American continent, the US,
Absolutely.
it's a good option. It's a good price range as well. I think the new favorite from what my recent experience has been after the pandemic, I see a lot of Indian nationals also heading towards New Zealand and Australia. I think there's some benefits in New Zealand and Australia. There's the financial security with the government organized CRICOS, which is basically like a escrow account. Your finances are a little bit more safer.
Correct.
So I think, if you ask me, Middle East, yes, it's great. You can do your pilot training in the Middle Eastern schools as well. Definitely, they're a little bit more expensive.
How
But
much
for-
approx?
I would say if you're looking at doing your pilot training anywhere in the Middle East, 500 to 700,000 dirhams. That's almost 150,000 US dollars, I would say.
Correct. Okay.
So yes, I would say Europe and Middle East would be the most expensive options to do your pilot training.
Correct.
It's a good option, but it's just that you need to know if you're planning on working in Europe, great, good
Correct,
option. If
correct.
not, US, North America, Australia, and New Zealand. These are my
Correct.
recommended options for students based in India.
Yeah, if they want to do it in abroad. Yes,
Exactly. That's what I
absolutely.
would say.
Great. That's
Now, also, one more question just comes to my
Yes.
mind. Most of my students ask me about the airline life, and they tell me, when you're flying as an airline pilot, is it true that you get served a completely separate meal as a first officer and a captain? Does that still happen in the Indian Airlines?
Yes. So the meal that is served to the captain is different than the meal served to the first officer. It is supposed to be different because if in case one of the food item causes food poisoning to one of the pilot, then the different meal, if it is served to the other pilot, then the other pilot can take care of the flight.
So what I want to know is who gets the priority, the captain or the first officer?
No, both of them get the good quality food
No. So, for
but
example,
different food.
if there's chicken and there's veg.
There will be both to
Okay.
chicken and veg
Okay.
to both the pilots.
Because I've heard
doing
funny
different-
stories where the captain's like, no, I took the chicken, so you have to have the veg now.
No, it is not necessary.
Nothing like that.
No,
Okay.
no.
All right.
So there is it depends. In India, some people are vegetarians.
Sure,
so
sure.
then there is a non-veg meal packed in a different box.
Okay.
And then that is for first officer and captain both. So
Okay.
then they take it whenever they want it.
Okay.
Yeah, because some of them don't want veg and non-veg together in the same meal box. So
Okay.
that's-
My next question to you is, I kind of know the answer to this, but I still want you to talk about this and tell me, have you had any interesting scenarios you could talk about, something out of the world, something beautiful, something which, took you
Yeah.
to that next level and you did something amazing, during your flights?
Like challenges?
Yeah, some
Yeah,
challenges during your
recently
flight.
there were quite a few. And
If you could share your most
recently there were
recent,
quite a few. The most recent one was during passage of this Biparjoy storm. There were very strong crosswinds, about 17 to 27 knots gusting all the way.
Wow.
And because of that, the aircraft was quite, not very, very stable during the approach itself, even if it was on the autopilot. And then for landing, you have to disconnect it because if it is beyond the autoline limitations, even if you consider doing that,
Sure.
so pilot is there has to
Sure.
do that. So if this is a runway straight, then we were coming in like this, and then aircraft wing is like going
Just rattling left and right.
While crossing the threshold at about 50 feet, the aircraft wing dropped without me giving any input. And thereafter, again, I corrected when I was flaring at about 30 feet. That time, when I was trying to straighten the nose, aircraft wing again dropped, and then it was at this altitude.
Intense moments, right? Wow.
Yeah, then had to do a go around. So things like that.
I think I'm sure many of you guys have already seen that amazing video which went viral of Captain Neha doing that
Yeah.
beautiful go around, and I think pretty good job, I would say.
Thank
in
you.
an instant, reacting to
very,
that.
very-
And by the way, guys, 50 feet, 100 feet, it's nothing.
Yeah,
It's nothing.
very
Even
challenging.
500 feet is hardly any distance
Correct.
when you're so close to the
Correct,
ground at that
correct,
speeds.
correct.
So I would personally
True.
congratulate you on that. And I
Thank
think
you,
that was
thank
a
you.
great maneuver, a great, something we
so
will all
much.
be, I'm sure all the passengers were very grateful
Yeah,
to you.
they were really thankful after we landed it for the second time. So what was your challenging experience during your flight?
Okay, so I had two crazy experiences, right? One was during my pilot training, and one was later in 2017 when I was doing my instructor courses and stuff, when I was upgrading my licenses. So back in 2009, when I had just started my training and my instructor signed me off on my solo cross country for the first time, I'd done a bunch of short flights within my airport airspace. But then for the first time, my instructor tells me go on a 300 nautical mile journey alone. And as you can understand, it was quite a big moment for me, and I'm a bit nervous. And anyways, I take off from our home base, long cross country. It was very busy, right? It was everybody is talking on the radio. And for me, it's a little bit of overwhelming feeling because I'm doing multitasking for the first time, everything on your own. And I think I must have said something like, I wish these guys just shut up. And I think be very careful of what you wish for, because sometimes wishes come true. And the radio went silent 10 minutes later. And I'm like, wow, I'm enjoying it for a few minutes. But then they're not talking to me back. I'm trying to contact them and nobody's replying back. And I'm like, wait, this doesn't add up. It's a very busy part of the airspace and it's not normal for them to be so quiet. And then obviously, naturally, I start freaking out. I was supposed to start turning lefts and rights. I was supposed to do a bunch of stuff. But by the way, this happened on the return leg. So I did my first leg, landed, took a 10-minute stop, called my instructor, said everything's great, and I took off.
Okay.
And then on my way back, halfway, this happened. So I'm just flying, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a bit nervous. I'm pulling my, in a Cessna 172, you pull out your radio jacks and connect it. So the right seat is empty. You know, that right seat being completely empty and not being, full with this big person, it's a bit scary. So I kept my big bag, pretending that's my instructor, right? Also because the plane was too heavy on the left, because my massive 6'3" instructor was no longer on the chair. So I felt like the plane was too heavy on the left. So I had my big bag. Anyways, so I'm wondering, what do I do? What do I do? I pull the jacks and I connect the radio jacks all the way to the right. I remember literally banging on the, on the general area of the cockpit, miraculously hoping that the radios would start working. I checked the radio 1, radio 2, nothing.
Okay.
And I'm like, what are the odds, Anyways, it took me a few more minutes. But one thing what I would like to draw your attention to is that humans tend to fix things and they feel like, oh, I can fix it. Knocking on the radio is not going to fix it, but I tried. And sometimes you don't accept that there's a problem. It took me a few more minutes to accept it, saying, Rizwan, this is an emergency, just accept it. And then finally I had to follow the standard protocol, squawk the right codes, you squawk 7600. You follow the right procedures, but because it was a beautiful VFR day, a beautiful clear sky, I just continued descending to a little bit more lower area. I had a highway, which I knew, which would run north to south. And I just pretty much flew over the highway until I saw the lake, turned left, followed the light signals. By the way, I'm sure some of you know already. So when you squawk 7600 and you fly towards your flight plan and you stick to your flight plan, don't do anything different, right?
Correct.
And when I go close to my airport, they were expecting me, obviously. So they gave me those light gun signals. Anyways, I'll tell you about that later. And I did another circle, waiting for the right lights. And then I finally saw flashing green, which is land immediately. Immediately, right? First, they gave me steady green, which is supposed to be land. But then they gave me flashing green, land immediately. I landed. Fine, it was beautiful, whatever. I came out of the runway and everybody, all my students and instructors, everybody's clapping. They're like, oh, great job. I always tell my students, if you think something's wrong, just check again. Just be sure. Anyways, long story short, I landed safely. Everything was fine. But there were a couple of things which happened right after that. I go and park the plane and my instructor tells me, come with me. And then we jump on a little golf cart and we're driving towards the tower. And I'm like, nobody's allowed to go towards the tower, right? So we got some special clearances. They opened the doors. Me and my instructor, we go up to the tower. And literally the tower guy, so they have these little papers where they write squawk codes, 3125, scratch 7600 was written next to it. So he pulled that little piece of paper, which I still have it in my logbook, and he gave it to me, said, as soon as you squawked 7600, he literally said, I was so sad that I'll have to, ruin everything, the whole arrangements. But anyways, he complimented us. We did a good job. But I think that incident to this day, when I think about it, because it was the first time it happened, it was extremely overwhelming. And then all my instructors said to me, oh, 1 in a million situation. All my instructors and students, we have never heard anybody else in this region who's had a radio communication total failure. Guess what? This was 2009. It happened again in 2017.
Oh my God.
But this time I was, instructor, and this was 2009, 2017, much different. The second time and the first time was such a huge contrast, My level, I didn't even have a first stripe. I had hardly 21 hours of flying when this happened. And the next time it was a couple of hundreds of hours of flying later. So I always look at those two incidents and how much the world had changed in between
Experience also matters.
These things, So anyways, the point of the story is that, yes, sometimes some things could go wrong, but as long as you're trained for it, knowledge is power is what I always tell my students.
Absolutely.
If you know the procedures, there's nothing to be afraid of. If your engine shuts down, guess what? We've done that 20 times before your private pilot check ride. So if you're a private pilot, you've done shutting down the engines and restarting it dozens of times. So you're confident, you're not scared because you have studied. And that's why I always tell my students, don't study just to pass the exam. Study because you're going to use that information to save lives one day. And that's what I always tell my students.
Absolutely. Definitely. Very, very true. Great to hear that story and amazing advice. I absolutely agree with what you just said. And we also give the same advice to us, our students as well.
No, I
And,
have to say, you guys are doing a great job. I think you guys are
Thank
providing a lot of end-to-end solutions. I remember all the horrible things I went through during pilot training, the misinformation, the no
Absolutely.
transparency. 2008, 2009 was a very different world out there. We didn't have anyone who guided us
Absolutely.
how to do the conversions or how to do the pilot training. I mean, I think you guys are doing a pretty good job with assisting
Thank you.
people with the DGCA conversions. I get a lot of comments and followers. You know, sometimes I've shared some of your information, and I've seen a lot of good feedback from the general public out there. So I would congratulate you on your work.
Thank you. Thank you
Good
so
job
much.
on everything
Thanks
you're
a
doing,
lot.
and I wish you and your company all the best with the future endeavors.
It is great pleasure to have you on board. It was good to know all
So
the
much.
experiences that you had, whatever we could have it in the last few minutes. And we look forward to have you again.
Thank you so much,
very
and it'll be my pleasure.
Thank you.
You're the first